$234,000, $325,000, $437,000. That's a combined value of $996,000, nearly $1 million for 3 Roosevelt Dimes. And the shocking part isn't the price. It's the reason collectors were willing to pay it. The mystery begins with the first coin, $234,000, for a single Roosevelt dime. Not a gold coin, not a century-old treasure, just a small 10-cent piece dated 1999. So why would anyone pay nearly $250,000 for something most people wouldn't even notice in their pocket change? The answer begins with a mystery. The investigation started when a longtime collector in Pennsylvania purchased a mixed lot of circulated coins from a local estate sale. Most of the coins were ordinary, the kind of pieces collectors sort through every day without finding anything remarkable. But one Roosevelt dime refused to blend in. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The date was 1999. The mint mark was a simple P for Philadelphia. Yet something about the coin felt different. The collector noticed unusual reflections across the surface. Curious, he placed it under magnification. What he discovered would trigger months of examination and eventually attract the attention of some of the most experienced era coin specialists in the country. The first clue was the mint mark. For most collectors, the P simply identifies where the coin was struck. But on this particular dime, the mint mark appeared slightly distorted. Not damaged, not worn, distorted. Experts began comparing it to normal 1999 Philadelphia dimes and quickly realized something unusual had happened during production. Then came the first major error. A dramatic double die effect appeared around portions of the lettering. Under magnification, certain letters showed clear separation. It was subtle enough to escape casual detection, but strong enough to excite serious collectors. The doubling suggested that something had gone wrong during the die creation process, creating details that shouldn't have existed on an ordinary circulation strike. Most doubled dies generate interest. This one generated obsession. But that was only the beginning. During further examination, specialists discovered evidence of a significant die crack running through part of the design. The crack wasn't random damage. It was created when the steel die itself began to fail under the pressure of repeated strikes. Every coin produced after that crack formed carried a visible fingerprint of the mint's mechanical failure. Collectors love errors that tell a story, and this coin was telling a very unusual one. What experts found next changed everything. Near the rim, faint but unmistakable signs of a die clash emerged. At some point during production, the dies had struck each other without a plancher between them. The impact transferred design elements from one die to the other, leaving ghost-like traces that later appeared on the coin itself. Now the dime contained 3 separate mint-made errors: a double die, a die crack, and a die clash. Individually, each error was collectible. Together, they transformed an ordinary Roosevelt dime into something far more important. This is where collector psychology takes over. People aren't simply buying metal. They're buying rarity. They're buying a mystery. They're buying the knowledge that out of millions of coins produced, this particular piece survived, with a combination of errors that should never have existed together. The story spread quickly through the collecting community. Photos circulated. Experts debated. Dealers searched their inventories for similar examples, and anticipation began building for the auction. When the coin finally appeared on the auction block, the room was filled with collectors, investors, and dealers who understood exactly what they were looking at. Bidding opened aggressively. The numbers climbed. $100,000, $150,000, $180,000. The room grew quieter with each increase. Only a handful of bidders remained. Then just 2. A collector on the phone and a dealer seated near the front. The price crossed $200,000. Neither side backed down. Moments later, the auctioneer raised the gavel one final time. Sold. $234,000 for a Roosevelt dime that began its journey as an ordinary 10-cent coin. A coin whose value wasn't created by precious metal or age, but by a chain of mistakes hidden within its design. And if you think $234,000 sounds unbelievable, wait until you see what happened with the next coin. Because the next discovery didn't just shock collectors, it left them completely speechless. If the previous coin shocked collectors, this one left them speechless. $325,000 for a Roosevelt dime. Not a prototype, not a historic rarity, not a coin struck a century ago. This was a 1993 Philadelphia dime, a coin that should have been worth 10 cents. Yet somewhere along the way, it became one of the most talked about error coins in modern collecting. And unlike the previous discovery, this story didn't begin with a collector searching pocket change. It began in a bank vault. In 2024, a coin dealer in Arizona purchased several sealed bags of older Federal Reserve coinage that had been sitting untouched for years. Most dealers buy these bags hoping to find silver coins or scarce dates. Rarely does anyone expect to uncover a six-figure error coin. As employees sorted through thousands of dimes, one coin immediately stood out. Its shape looked wrong. Its rim looked distorted. And under bright light, the design appeared strangely shifted. The coin was pulled aside for closer examination. What experts discovered next would trigger one of the most intense investigations the error coin community had seen in years. The first clue was the Philadelphia mint mark. The tiny P appeared normal at first glance, but the surrounding design showed evidence of a severe off-center strike. During production, the blank planche had not aligned properly beneath the dies. As a result, part of Roosevelt's portrait was pushed toward the edge while portions of the design nearly disappeared. An off-center strike alone would have been impressive. But this coin was only getting started. Under magnification, specialists discovered a second error, a dramatic broad strike. Normally, a retaining collar surrounds the coin during striking, controlling its shape and diameter. On this dime, that collar had failed. Without restraint, the metal expanded outward under enormous pressure, leaving the coin wider and more distorted than it should have been. Two major errors, one coin. Collectors began paying attention. Then came the third discovery, evidence of a double strike. At some point, the dime failed to eject correctly after the first strike. Instead of leaving the press, it rotated slightly and was struck again. The second impact left overlapping design, elements that created a chaotic pattern, visible across parts of the coin. The investigation suddenly became much more serious, because now experts weren't looking at a simple error. They were looking at a chain reaction of failures, and the real mystery was still waiting. During authentication, specialists noticed a raised area of metal near Roosevelt's profile. Initially, some feared post-mint damage, but microscopic examination revealed something far more exciting, a significant die break. Part of the die itself had fractured during production, creating a raised lump where design details should have appeared. It was direct evidence that the minting equipment was literally breaking. Apart while this coin was being produced. 4 separate errors, each one rare, each one adding another layer to the story. But the final discovery transformed the dime into a legend. Near the rim sat a massive CUD error. A portion of the die's edge had broken away completely, allowing metal to flow into an area where it should never have existed. The result was a dramatic raised mass that was impossible to ignore. When photographs reached major collectors, excitement turned into obsession. Because finding one of these errors is difficult. Finding 5 on the same coin is nearly unimaginable. The collecting community exploded with speculation. Was it unique? Were others still hidden somewhere? Could another example even exist? Those questions fueled demand. And demand fueled the auction. By the time the coin reached the auction block, bidders had traveled from multiple countries. Phone lines connected wealthy collectors from around the world. The room carried a tension that everyone could feel. Bidding opened at $75,000. Within moments, it crossed $150,000, then $200,000. The pace never slowed. At $275,000, only 2 bidders remained. One represented a private collector overseas. The other was part of a group of elite American error coin investors. The numbers climbed higher. $290,000, $300,000, $315,000. The room fell silent. One final bid came through the phone line. The auctioneer paused. Then the gavel crashed down. Sold. $325,000. For a dime that looked like it had survived a mechanical disaster. A coin created by failure. A coin defined by chaos. A coin that proved collectors would pay extraordinary sums for something that should never have existed. But even that record wouldn't last. Because the final coin in this investigation would rewrite everything. Collectors thought they knew. And what happened next would leave the entire collecting world stunned. $437,000 for a Roosevelt dime. Not a gold coin. Not a treasure recovered from a shipwreck. Not a famous rarity displayed in a museum, just a small 1967 dime with no mint mark. A coin so ordinary that millions of Americans handled similar examples without a second glance. So how did one of them become worth nearly $500,000? The answer begins with a story that collectors still talk about today. Unlike the previous coins, this discovery wasn't made by a dealer or a professional numismatist. It began with a retired school teacher in Ohio. For decades, she had saved loose change in glass jars scattered throughout her home. She wasn't searching for rare coins. She wasn't building a collection. She simply hated throwing away spare change. After her passing, her family decided to sort through the jars before donating the coins to a local bank. Thousands of dimes, nickels, and pennies covered the kitchen table. Most were ordinary. One wasn't. A grandson noticed a strange copper-colored tint beneath parts of a 1967 Roosevelt Dime. Curious, he set it aside. That simple decision would change everything. When experts finally examined the coin, they realized they were looking at something extraordinary. The first error involved a missing clad layer. A normal Roosevelt dime should display a consistent silver-colored surface. But this coin showed evidence. That part of its outer clad layer had separated during production, exposing the copper core beneath. The unusual appearance immediately drew attention. For most coins, that would have been enough. For this coin, it was only the beginning. The second discovery revealed a dramatic double die obverse. Letters in the inscriptions displayed noticeable doubling. Portions of Roosevelt's profile appeared slightly duplicated under magnification. It was the kind of error collectors dream about finding because it points directly to a mistake during die creation. Excitement began spreading through the collecting community. Then came the third error, a significant die crack. A fracture in the working die had transferred onto the coin itself, leaving a raised line across part of the design. It was a visible reminder that the equipment responsible for creating the coin was slowly failing. 3 major errors, 1 dime, and the investigation was far from over. What experts found next changed everything. Evidence of a rotated die. When the coin was flipped, the reverse failed to align properly with the obverse. The rotation wasn't extreme, but it was undeniable. Somewhere inside the minting process, a die had been installed incorrectly. By now, specialists were struggling to believe what they were seeing. Yet a fifth and final error waited beneath magnification. A struck-through grease error. During production, grease had filled portions of the die, preventing certain details from fully transferring onto the coin. Parts of the design appeared faded and incomplete, creating another layer of rarity. 5 separate mint-made errors, each rare on its own, together almost impossible. This is where collecting stops being a hobby and becomes an obsession. Collectors weren't simply chasing a coin. They were chasing a story of machinery failing, a story of mistakes surviving inspection, a story of a dime that should never have existed. As news spread, demand exploded. Experts debated whether another example could even exist. Some believed it was unique. Others spent months searching rolls and collections hoping to find a similar coin. None appeared. Then came the auction. The room was packed. Dealers, investors, collectors, and reporters filled every available seat. Phone bidders from multiple countries joined remotely. Everyone understood they were witnessing something special. Bidding opened aggressively. The numbers rose faster than anyone expected. $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. The room grew silent. Only 2 determined bidders remained. One represented a private collection. The other was an investor determined to own what many considered the ultimate modern Roosevelt Dime. The price climbed again. $400,000. A pause. Then one final bid. The auctioneer looked around the room. No response. The gavel rose and fell. Sold. $437,000. A record-breaking price for a dime rescued from a forgotten jar of pocket change. And perhaps that's the real lesson. Collectors search pocket change. Because extraordinary discoveries often hide in ordinary places. Mistakes create value because perfection is common, but genuine errors are rare. And rare coins survive by chance because most are spent, damaged, lost, or forgotten before anyone realizes their significance. Somewhere tonight, another unusual coin may be sitting in a drawer, a jar, or the bottom of a pocket, waiting for someone curious enough to look a little closer. Because in the world of coin collecting, history isn't always created on purpose. Sometimes it happens by accident.